"May I have your leftovers, sir?" This phrase changed Arthur's life forever. Under the dim glow of chandeliers shaped like frozen stars, the hum of wealth whispered through every corner of Le Pavillon, the most exclusive restaurant nestled in the city's beating heart. It was a night draped in velvet stillness. The quiet was broken only by the soft elegance of a piano weaving through the air. Every table was a quiet kingdom of power and prestige, lit by candles and crowned by crystal, a world away from the city's harsh realities. In the farthest corner, tucked behind an arrangement of orchids and shadow, sat Arthur Vance. At 48, he was a tech mogul, a billionaire, and a widower, a man who commanded industries but couldn't command his own happiness. His suit was tailored to perfection, his platinum watch catching stray flickers of light, but none of it could cover the hollowness in his chest. He stared blankly at the untouched filet mignon before him, its aroma rich and inviting. Across from him, the empty chair echoed more loudly than any sound in the room. It was a ghost, a constant, painful reminder of a life that was no longer his. His fingers tightened slightly around the stem of his wineglass. 10 years had passed since the accident, a decade since his wife, Eleanor, and their 3-year-old son, Leo, had vanished from the world in a brutal crush of twisted metal and shattered glass. But for Arthur, it was yesterday. Since then, Arthur had filled his life with a deafening silence, a strict routine, and an empire of distractions designed to keep the memories at bay. He lifted the glass, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. But just as he brought it to his lips, a voice broke the air beside him. It was soft, trembling, and entirely unexpected. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Arthur froze. He turned and found himself looking down at a young woman. She could not have been older than 19, her blonde hair pulled into a loose, messy bun with strands falling in weary curls around her tired face. Her coat was threadbare, clinging to her shoulders against the early autumn chill. In her arms was a baby, perhaps 8 months old, wrapped in a faded blanket. Her eyes, however, held no shame, only exhaustion and a quiet fierceness. The girl's voice had been almost a whisper, yet somehow it had sliced through the quiet of the restaurant like a violin string snapping. The other patrons began to murmur, their judgmental glances falling upon the scene. A waiter began to step forward, concern already wrinkling his brow, ready to escort the disruption away. But Arthur raised a hand suddenly, a small yet commanding gesture that froze the waiter in his tracks. He studied her face, searching for a hint of manipulation or pity-seeking, but found none. There was only a profound need, not for herself, but for the tiny life held so protectively against her chest. A life she was fighting for. Arthur blinked as if waking from a long, dense sleep. In that instant, something shifted inside him. It wasn't a grand epiphany, not yet, but a murmur, a spark in the cold, dormant cavern of his heart. The room stilled. "Take it," he said softly, his voice raspy from disuse. The words were almost for himself, an instruction to a part of him he thought had died long ago. She did not dive at the food or devour it like someone starving. Instead, with a reverence that struck him harder than any scream could have, she reached into a satchel draped across her shoulder and took out a small square of cloth, clean though fraying at the edges, and a tiny plastic spoon. She carefully wrapped the mashed potatoes and the remaining slices of meat inside, folding the corners with the gentle precision of someone preserving a priceless treasure. These were not leftovers. They were a lifeline. Then, kneeling on the cold pavement, she cradled the baby closer and scooped a modest portion of the warm food. She blew softly on it before guiding the spoon to baby Sam's mouth, her entire world focused on that single act. The child opened his mouth instinctively, and the moment the mashed potatoes touched his tongue, he cooed. It was a soft, gurgling sound of joy so pure it made Arthur's fingers curl around the edge of the table. A smile bloomed across baby Sam's round cheeks, like a sunrise after a long, frozen night. It was the kind of smile Arthur had not seen in years, not since his own son, Leo. Something caught in his throat, a sharp, sudden ache. He looked away just for a second, trying to clear the sudden mist from his vision. When he looked back, the girl said nothing, She simply kept feeding her son, one spoonful at a time, with infinite patience. When the baby seemed full, Clara carefully tucked the cloth bundle into her bag. She stood, glanced once more at Arthur, nodding slightly, not as if to thank him, but as if to acknowledge something unspoken between them. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Arthur remained seated, unable to move, staring at the spot where she had stood. He did not yet understand why, only that he had to follow. His footsteps were muffled against the quiet pavement as he followed at a distance. The city noise faded behind him as Clara slipped down a narrow alleyway, clutching the baby to her chest like a fragile shield against the world. The alley opened into a crumbling parking lot flanked by brick buildings. Abandoned cars sat like ghosts, but one, an old dented Navy sedan, was different. It was lived in, the windows fogged, the paint peeling. But it was shelter. She walked to it without hesitation, opened the back door, and carefully settled in with the baby. A thin blanket served as a mattress. She began to whisper something only the child could hear. Arthur lingered in the shadows, transfixed. The setting was bleak, but the love was undeniable. He stepped forward. Something must have alerted her, for she turned, startled, her eyes wide. Their gazes locked across the lot. "I'm sorry," he said, his hands raised in peace. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." Her expression was guarded. "You followed me," she stated, her voice flat, not a question, but a fact. "Yes, I did," he admitted. She didn't run, she didn't cry, she only looked at him, weighing the stranger in the expensive clothes. "I saw how you fed your son," Arthur said. "I've never seen anything like that." I needed to understand. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice quiet. "His name is Sam." Arthur repeated the name, Sam. It felt strangely familiar, a soft echo of the name he hadn't spoken in a decade. Arthur gestured vaguely towards the city lights. "I can help. A hotel, food, whatever you need." Clara raised a hand to stop him. "No, I'm not asking for money," she said firmly. Surprised, he asked, "Then what do you want?" Clara looked down at Sam, her eyes softening. "Just one day," she said softly. "One day where he's warm, full, and safe. That's all." The words hit him harder than any demand ever could. The streetlight flickered above them, and in that amber glow, Arthur saw something familiar in her eyes. They were his late wife's eyes. He didn't know why he did it, but he began to act silently and precisely, the way he built his fortune. The next day, he made a series of discreet calls from his high-rise office, setting a quiet plan in motion. He had found her car again, parked behind an abandoned church lot. Without approaching, without intruding, he left small packages near the vehicle in the early mornings before sunrise: baby formula, diapers, and homemade soup. At first, Clara was skeptical. She had learned to survive by expecting disappointment. But these quiet gestures never came with notes or expectations. No one asked her to be grateful. It was simply there, steady and real. He arranged for a pediatrician to make a discreet visit, pretending to be part of a church outreach program. Clara didn't know who had sent him, but when the doctor left, she held Sam longer than usual and whispered, "Thank you." Then one evening, as the October cold began seeping deeper into the nights, disaster struck. Sam had been cranky all afternoon, and by nightfall he was burning with fever. Clara tried everything, but nothing worked. There was only one thing left she could do. She pulled out her old, cracked phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed just 2 words, "Help us." She didn't know if he would come or why she trusted that he might. But 6 minutes later, headlights swept across the curb. Arthur's black SUV screeched to a halt. He jumped out before the engine even stopped, his coat flaring in the wind, his eyes wild with a fierce, protective urgency. He didn't speak. He simply held out his arms. Clara placed Sam into them, and for the first time, the baby didn't resist a stranger's touch. His tiny hand curled around Arthur's index finger, weak but intentional. Arthur cradled him with surprising familiarity and strode back towards the hospital. "I want a doctor, now," he said to the receptionist, his voice steel and fire. "This child has a critical fever. I will cover every cent." The receptionist, taken aback by his authority, immediately took Sam. Clara sat in the hallway, shivering with exhaustion, her head in her hands. Arthur stayed by her side, a silent, solid presence in the sterile corridor. When the nurse returned with updates, Sam was stable, resting. Clara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was the first time she had let herself fall apart since she'd become a mother. And for Arthur, it was the first time in 10 years that holding someone didn't feel like a betrayal. They didn't speak of love, they didn't define anything, but something shifted irrevocably in that moment. It began with a photo, slightly blurry, taken at night, of Arthur Vance exiting an emergency room with a baby in his arms and a young woman close behind. Within hours, it flooded social media. The internet exploded. Tech billionaire's late-night rescue, teen mom and the tycoon. Waves of speculation, judgment, and cruelty washed over them. Clara's identity didn't stay private for long. In the apartment Arthur had arranged for them, Clara sat in darkness, the only light from her phone. Each swipe brought more venom, each headline more shame. Her chest tightened, her hands trembled. When Arthur walked in, he knew something had changed. Clara's posture was closed off. "I can't do this," she said. "I don't want him seeing lies one day and wondering if they're true." Arthur sat beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly, his voice steady. "Neither did Sam." She shook her head. "People don't care. They've already decided who I am." Arthur's voice steadied. "Then let me tell them who you really are." That afternoon, he called his publicist. No statements, no scripted press release. The next night, he went live on national television. The setup was simple. A quiet studio, soft lighting, no distractions. The interviewer asked nothing shocking, just gave him space to speak. Arthur began. Not with Clara, but with Eleanor and Leo. He told the story he had avoided for years. The accident, the silence, the way grief had hollowed him out, leaving a polished, empty shell. "I stopped living the day they died," he said. "And then I spoke of Clara. She wasn't looking for charity," he said. "She wasn't even looking for help. She just wanted to feed her son." His voice cracked as he added, "She didn't take anything from me. She gave me something no one else could, a reason to care again, a reason to breathe." He looked into the camera, his eyes clear. "Clara is not a headline. She is a mother. Sam is not a prop. He is a beautiful child." "I did not save them," he said, his voice gaining strength. "They saved me." The interview was raw, unguarded, and deeply human. And it worked. The next morning, the tide shifted. Online conversations changed. People began defending her, sharing their own stories. Mothers shared their stories of single parenthood, poverty, and judgment. Nurses spoke up, explaining how many girls like Clara fall through the cracks. Donations started flowing into shelters. It came one afternoon in a plain white envelope, wedged beneath the apartment door like an unexpected gust of wind. Clara stared at it for a long time before opening it, her hands trembling. Inside, the handwriting was familiar, tight, neat, and unmistakably her mother's. There were only a few lines, no grand apology, no dramatic pleas, just simple words written in ink that seemed pressed too hard on the page. "If there's still a chance to know my grandson, I would like to try." She sat at the kitchen table for over an hour. The letter crumpled gently in her hands as Sam played nearby with colorful blocks. She didn't cry, she didn't get angry, but the silence that filled the room was thick enough to suffocate. When Arthur arrived that evening, he found her in the same spot. He walked over, picked up the letter, and read it. He set it down and took a seat beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been almost 2 years since they told me I was no longer their daughter." Arthur nodded slowly. "You don't owe them anything." Clara turned to him, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. "But Sam, doesn't he deserve to know where he comes from, even if it's broken?" Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. "Don't let him grow up with the same emptiness you had. Let him have the chance to forgive or not, but let him choose." The words resonated with a painful truth. 3 days later, they drove to the town Clara once called home, a sleepy stretch of green hills and narrow roads where every face seemed to remember the past a little too well. She was terrified. Her parents' house stood at the end of a gravel driveway, the white paint slightly faded, the porch swing still creaking in the wind. Clara stood outside for several long moments, Sam on her hip. The front door opened slowly. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, sharp features softened by time and sorrow. It was Clara's mother. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Her eyes landed on Sam, then on Clara, and they filled instantly with tears. Then, with a trembling breath, her mother stepped forward, her arms open but uncertain. "I wasn't strong," she whispered, her voice catching. "I was scared of what people would think." "I lost you anyway." Clara said nothing, her lips parted slightly. Her father appeared behind her mother, older than she remembered, his hands folded nervously in front of him. He looked at his grandson. He looked like he was seeing something holy. Sam reached out a hand, not knowing the history, not caring, just curious. And that, somehow, shattered everything. Her mother broke down. Stepping forward, arms open but uncertain, she whispered, "May I? May I hold him?" Clara hesitated only a moment. Then slowly, she placed Sam in her mother's arms. The older woman clutched him. She sobbed softly, whispering things to the boy, who blinked up at her with innocent wonder. Arthur watched from the side, his chest tight. He wasn't part of this moment, but he was a witness to its power. When Clara finally stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother, the past had not disappeared, but it had been softened. Forgiveness was not a lightning strike, it was a slow sunrise. That afternoon, the 3 generations sat around the old kitchen table where Clara once ate cereal before school. Her mother served tea, and her father bounced Sam gently on his knee. And for the first time in years, there was laughter in that house. Clara caught Arthur's gaze from across the room, and he smiled. She mouthed 2 simple words, "Thank you." He shook his head, smiling back. "No," he whispered to himself, barely audible. "Thank you for going home." And in that moment, something shifted from gratitude to something much deeper. 1 year later, the world had changed, but only in the ways that mattered. The noise had faded, the headlines were gone. In their place was something far quieter, far more powerful, a life. It was a bright spring afternoon when they returned to the park. A humble wooden arch wrapped with ivy and ribbon stood under an old oak tree. Clara stood barefoot, her white dress fluttering in the breeze. She had never looked more beautiful, not because of the dress or the sun behind her, but because of the life in her eyes, the kind of radiance that only grows after surviving darkness. At the center of it all stood a little boy in a navy vest and matching bow tie. Sam, now nearly 2 years old, clutched a small velvet box in both hands as he wobbled across the grass. He was determined to deliver it to the man waiting just a few steps away. Arthur stood there, not in a designer suit, but in a soft gray blazer that Clara had once told him made him look almost human. As Sam reached him, Arthur knelt down and took the box gently from his tiny fingers. The boy looked up and giggled, then toddled back to where Clara's parents sat, their faces etched with a quiet joy. Arthur stood and looked up at her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You didn't ask for anything," he said softly. "You didn't beg. You didn't expect. You just showed up on the worst night of my life. You gave me a chance to remember what it feels like to be needed, to be alive. You didn't take my leftovers, Clara," he whispered. "You gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. You gave me family. You gave me love. You gave me a future." He paused, tears glimmering in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Her own eyes filled before the first tear could even fall. She nodded once, twice, then dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing through her tears as she whispered, "Yes." They embraced, arms folding into one another like pieces of a puzzle. They were long lost and finally found. The minister began the ceremony, simple and short, while Sam played with petals on the ground, occasionally glancing up, trying to understand. But it was during the vows, right as Arthur promised to love not just Clara but the son who had brought them together, that Sam wandered up and wrapped his arms around Arthur's leg. "Daddy!" he chirped. And just like that, the entire park held its breath. Arthur looked down, eyes wet, and bent to pick up the boy, holding him with one arm and Clara with the other. He whispered, "I love you, son." In that embrace under the sun, with no audience but a few friends in the sky, everything that had once been broken felt whole again. Arthur had not rescued a young mother, she had rescued him from grief, from isolation, from a life so polished and empty it had nearly swallowed him whole. In the place of loneliness, a new family had been born, not from blood or planning, but from a whisper and a shared meal. They were not perfect. They didn't need to be. They were together, and that, finally, was enough. A journey that redefined what it means to be a family had just begun. The story of Arthur, Clara, and Sam became a quiet legend in the city, not of a billionaire's charity, but of the transformative power of a simple act of kindness, a testament to second chances. Their home wasn't a mansion, but a comfortable house filled with the scent of baking and the sound of a child's laughter. The walls were covered not with expensive art, but with Sam's colorful drawings. Arthur, once a man entombed by his past, was now fully present, his laughter genuine, his eyes clear. He found more joy in a toppling block tower than he ever had in a soaring stock market report. Her parents visited often, the years of silence and pain slowly being replaced by shared holidays and quiet Sunday afternoons. The broken bonds were healing, one memory at a time. They never forgot where they came from. Together, they started a foundation, a real one, dedicated to helping single mothers and their children, providing not just shelter but hope and a path forward. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale of a prince rescuing a damsel. It was the story of two broken souls who, in offering a piece of themselves to another, found a way to become whole again. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories are born from the quietest moments, from a simple request for leftovers that becomes a journey to the heart of what it truly means to be a family.